acceptance of who I was, acceptance of that inner child, I could only take him so far. I can only take myself so far through my wisdom and coping mechanisms and all that stuff, therapy and stuff. I have to take that with me. But once I come to the door that has a lock on it, after opening up so many doors, I need to get that key. But I get that key not from myself, but from Christ. Really. Hey everyone, it's me, the guy who speaks his sound waves into the microphone, the guy who now has a face, and that face is here to tell you that I'm going to be staying on camera for the rest of this podcast. I'm going to be doing things on camera so that I can, feel more personal with everything that I do. I've always kind of wanted to get on camera, and I planned on it, but it was hard to do that without, worrying too much about how I'd look and just the feeling. Plus, I didn't have a camera for most of the time. But now I am here. I'm here. It's okay. So, what am I going to do first with this? Well, I'm going to try to give my life story. Big thing first. That's what we like to do. We like to do the big first. Do the biggest thing possible. Yeah! We like to do the big, baby. So I'm going to talk about my life story, but mainly I'm going to talk about my Christian testimony through the lens of my life story. So like the complex trauma, childhood trauma, mental health stuff I talk about, I'm going to correlate it here to the Christian journey I'm embarking on recently over the past 4 weeks or so. So, starting off with my life, I was born a baby by my mother and father on August 22nd, 2002, and I was born in a hospital with people, and those people took care of me until I left the hospital and went home to my parents. And from then on, I basically grew up into a child. And so once I became a child, this is where it's going to get a little bit less stupid and goofy. My parents had struggled a lot with stress and with a lot of other, their own abuse that they've dealt with in their life and all that stuff. And it got to the point where they were arguing pretty frequently. And there was a lot of turmoil and conflict in the house. And I think by the point where I became a child, it had gone so bad that my brain molded like a sponge to it. And I started to pick up on their tendencies a lot. I started to become more angry, more hateful, more resenting, more fearful, anxiety and all that sort of stuff. I became more insecure. I became just someone who struggled with a lot of different things. And this grew and grew and grew eventually until, unfortunately, my oldest brother got cancer, just smack out of nowhere. We were faced with that very hard predicament, and it was something that hit us all very hard. And with me being the youngest of my brothers, the youngest in the family, I had to find a way to cope with such a powerful, strong, deadly, tragic event with a little baby brain, a brain the size of a raisin, pretty much. And it was hard because I had already developed a tendency of anger, hatred, eventually violence from a young age, beating people up and bullying and stuff. All that stuff was hard. I already grew into this person that had a potentially bad track to go down. And cancer really put that nail in the coffin on who I'd become for a very long time. So cancer hit our family really hard. It was something that we couldn't ever predict. Of course, it was something that none of us expected, and it just completely sidetracked everything in the family. And so what happened is that me and my brother, the one who didn't have cancer, I have two brothers rather. Me and my middle brother, we stayed home, and my oldest brother who had cancer and my mom went out to go and treat the cancer at Boston's Children's Hospital. So we could only visit every now and then. And so my dad had to raise us for a decent amount of time. I don't know how long, but my mom and brother were in and out of the hospital. So plenty of time without my mom. And if you understand how development works, that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. So it was really tough. And from then, I started spiraling more, just getting more and more into this sort of unhealthy habit. I started isolating more, became much more angry, much more insecure. I closed myself off entirely to people who could have helped me. I just completely withdrew from life, pretty much. I started gaining a ton of weight. Coping was my middle name, pretty much. I just had to cope with whatever thing could, I guess make the pain go away a little bit. Of course, I was completely oblivious to what I was doing. This was an unconscious thing. But, the pain was still there. There's only so much of an unconscious suit of armor you can put on your conscious before, whatever pain breaks through breaks through. And once it did, it broke through hard, you know. And so I started kind of being more and more, like I said, angry and closed off and never letting anyone in. Anyone who tried to understand me, I pushed away. I didn't want any of that. And from that came a lack of understanding from everyone around me on what I actually needed in my life. So I was eventually neglected through me isolating, through me avoiding and withdrawing. And I felt like everybody in the world was pretty much out to get me because I never felt comfortable around them. Anytime I felt comfortable around a person, it was immediately met with some sort of negative thing, like me reacting to an insecurity or an activation, or me just reacting in some way that was, very standoffish. I didn't want to let anyone in. I didn't want to uncork that bottle and let all the demons that were inside go and fester the world around me. Or even worse, go into someone else or go back into me and make things even worse. If I opened up that bottle, if I unscrewed the cork, there was a chance that a bunch of stuff that was left untreated and unchecked would come out and cause a lot of harm. And the problem is that it did regardless. It would do that. And that would happen all the way throughout school. I would end up suppressing and not communicating and everything. And, eventually up until like about fifth grade, all that stuff festered more and more within me until it became a lot more ugly and scary. I started developing suicidal thoughts by fifth grade. I started dealing with real mental health issues that adults go through at a very young age because everything in my life was so painful. And unfortunately, in fifth grade, my brother got cancer again, a second time. He, of course, recovered the first, but he got it a second time. And there, it was just, instead of having a clean slate for the most part, and then having the stain of poison that cancer would bring, that evil messing everything up and staining it past any sort of recovery, there was already, it was basically already a poisoned well. You just drop more into it, and all of a sudden, it just becomes more and more toxic, more and more harmful for whoever, unfortunately, falls into that well. And that happened, It happened in a way that was so hard to deal with. And I just kept spiraling more and more. But this time was a little different because instead of having just chemotherapy for my brother, which is what he was treated with before, there was another option that had to be presented. And it was a bone marrow transplant, which is basically just sticking a giant needle in the spine, I think, sucking out the bone marrow because he had leukemia, by the way. And that's in the bone marrow. And so you stick the donor's bone marrow, you jab it into someone's back, and, it makes up for the cellular problems or something, some science jargon. And so luckily, fortunately, thank God, my brother and I were a match. It was between my middle brother and I. And let me try to set the perspective of who I was. In fifth grade, it was my darkest time as a child. As a child, I was in the deepest pit of, just bad things I was doing. A lot of people could probably look at the outside and see that Austin Etchells as a demon child, violent, hate-filled, vulgar, all that stuff, closed off, seemingly remorseless, all that sort of, every sort of thing like that could be in a bad kid, I had. Of course, I had a heart inside, obviously, but it was basically surrounded by a thorn bush. If you try to stick your hand in there to get a grip of whatever my heart looked like, whether it was me or someone else, you would get thorns in your hand. It would hurt. And that's who I was. But when I got offered to do that bone marrow transplant between my brother and I took it immediately. I took it immediately and without hesitation. And so that kid, that demon child, on that day proved how good he really was. And I still think this day, that was the first moment God decided to act through me. We as people who deal with trauma, a lot of times we feel like we're bad people. We do things, out of our maladaptive mechanisms, and we feel like we're bad people because we have no way to properly treat the emotions that rise. The dysregulation that makes us act so drastically, and we'll harm ourselves and others through it. And so for so long, we keep doing that untreated, and when we're an adult, for example, we'll feel like we're a bad person. We feel like we're defined by our mistakes, that our dysregulated mind, the emotional mind that dictates the painful parts of ourselves, is us. And that everything else that we do is more of a mistake or a fluke or some sort of like offhand, sort of off-color thing that doesn't truly define us. And I believed that for a while. But in that moment, I proved otherwise. It was true. It was fully heartfelt that I was a good kid who was just rooted in so much pain that took his heart and stomped on it. And anyone who is hurt can turn into a monster, whether you want to call me that or not, you know? And so from then on, well, first, I gave the bone marrow transplant. And putting it blankly, I didn't feel like I did anything. I truly cared about my brother. I did. And that's why I did it. And I felt like what I did was treat his cancer. I felt like I helped him cure or, treat his cancer so it would go into remission. But the feeling I had when I woke up in that hospital room, it wasn't one of gratification or anything. It was just this feeling of emptiness. It didn't feel like it was valued that much for whatever reason. And so from then on, I just grew more and more into someone who needed to act out. I looked for attention. Once I got to middle school, I became an attention seeker. And I could tell it was all from that feeling that I was this kid who made so many bad mistakes. And then the first time and the biggest thing I could ever do to be good, giving that bone marrow transplant, it felt like nothing. It felt like I didn't do anything. And so why would I ever try to do anything good again? Why would I not try to get attention through some other way? Through desperation. That unconscious buildup changed me. And once I got to middle school, it was really hard to not spiral further. Keep using that word because it really all was a downward spiral. And so I started seeking attention. I was rude to people. I was acting out to teachers. I just kept doing a bunch of things to try to be funny and be a class clown and stuff. And of course, in middle school, that stuff gets you the lols. It gets you the LMAOs and stuff, but it doesn't get you what you're really looking for, which is true affection, nurturing, attachment, all that stuff. It doesn't get you it. It just gets you the laughs, and then all of a sudden you're going home wondering why you're so empty. A lot of us go through that. And I carried that into high school. But unfortunately, high school was a lot uglier. High school was it was more than attention seeking. It was hatred. It was insecurity. It was substance abuse. It was violence, true violence, violent thoughts, without intent, but violent thoughts. Suicidal thoughts, pretty frequently. Self-harm. A lot of people that I wronged, a lot of people that I bullied. A lot of people that I traumatized myself and abused. Because I was completely lost. No excuse other than that I was in pain. But that's not enough. And so today I live with those demons that haunted people and still do, knowing who I am. I became someone who was so unbelievably fixated on not feeling pain. If I couldn't feel pain, whether it's projecting it onto others so that they feel it, or if I could just numb it out with drugs, a bunch of different drugs that I almost died from, doing reckless stuff, then maybe I can make this all go away. This whole struggle, this trauma, maybe it can go away and that void can be filled every time I smoke up or take a swig or chug Robitussin or take a pill, whatever it is. And so high school eventually led to a downfall even further. Again, downward spiral. And God I feel like God was just, I don't know. In my life, it felt godless, I guess, is what I could say. It felt like God wasn't there, but he did work through me in that hospital, or when I, said I was going to do the bone marrow transplant. I'm confident he did, but I couldn't allow his work to unfold with who I was. It just wouldn't work. So in high school, I became more and more, for lack of a better term, evil. I wasn't evil, but I acted it. I let the evil of cancer that the devil brought on my family, I let myself embody it. And eventually, high school led to that downfall fully, where for a while I considered the worst day of my life, and maybe still the worst day of my life came. I don't even know the actual date, but I believe it was July 31st, 2020. After a bunch of, violence and threats and drug abuse and all that stuff, I eventually, from smoking a lot of weed and also from just my diagnosis, I had a psychotic episode of bipolar. I am bipolar with psychotic symptoms, and I've been diagnosed that since. And all of a sudden, my world changed. Everything in my life completely changed. I started believing crazy things about myself and others. I believed religious beliefs about me being like a second coming figure, being Jesus Christ. I started believing that the world was out to get me, that organizations were coming to get me. My mom was possessed by Satan. I started believing so many things. I hallucinated, all this stuff until I was hospitalized from it. My parents watching their youngest son basically go insane, losing his mind, lost, can't even articulate a sentence. They had to call the police and get me to the hospital, as much as it hurt them. And at that hospital, the hospital I was actually born at, I thought I was going to die there. I thought these people were trying to stop my destiny, or trying to kill me, or take my spiritual blood or something. And from that, I attacked them in my state of delusion. I thought I heard them say something to me that they were going to come get me, and I went to go fight them, and I had 14 different people. I'm a big guy, by the way. I'm a large man. You can't see it with this ginormous Arctic coat that I have on, but I'm a very big guy. And so they were all prepared, and I was scared because of it, because there were a bunch of people crowding around the emergency room right at my door, and I was scared of that. So I went at them. I tried to swing at a security guard, and he tried to tag me to the ground. I just stood there. I broke out of handcuffs that I was in. I don't even know how I did that. But I was just overpowered naturally, and I got put onto a bed and strapped on and had my face pushed in on and stuff. And I just felt like I was going to die. It was traumatizing enough on its own. The episode was bad enough, but that was even scarier in a way. But what was sick about it is that I reveled in it, because I was just so unbelievably delusional. I thought this was how it had to happen. Like, oh, this is right. This is like them actually showing me that I was right about my beliefs. The conspiracy is unfolding, Couldn't have felt less godly at that point, believing I was Jesus Christ. My life had been so godless at that time. I had lost friends from my psychotic episode. I had acted out in ways that were very dark and disturbing, and I lost friends and betrayed them. And at that point, I just was so lost, and I didn't care about what I was losing, to the point where I felt okay with becoming delusional, becoming psychotic. I had to escape so far that I would believe crazy things. I felt like I had strayed from whatever God planned for me in such a hard way, and I don't even think that's the case now, but it felt that way. And so I was hospitalized, of course. I was there for a while, and I returned, and I was put on medication. I was put on antipsychotics. But from all the pain I went through in high school, all the loss, I lost all my friends pretty much, all this sort of stuff, I became completely depressed to the point where it felt like physical pain was just taking over my entire heart. It felt like I was in actual pain. I would wake up crying in agony over the pain that I went through on a medication that messed with my brain and everything. And the worst of it was yet to come, because over the span of 2 years, I gained 100 pounds from that medication. And luckily there's a light at the end of the tunnel. If you can see, I was like 255 pounds there. I am not 100 pounds heavier than that right now. So there is a good ending to this, journey. But I lost a lot, and that depression was hard. So I couldn't handle it anymore. So I basically just hit up my old therapist. And of course, I wasn't able to open up. I was very standoffish. I couldn't be vulnerable. But here I was so desperate, and I had hope that something could be, keyword hope, something that could be done about it. So I called up my therapist, and I worked through it. I worked through all the mental health issues I had been through in a way. In a long story, over the span of 2-3 years, I have developed an awareness and a concentrated effort to try to understand my inner child and what he's been through and everything that I've gone through the abuse. And eventually, I learned through a intensive treatment program how to set boundaries and all this stuff, and I learned coping mechanisms. But I think what was hard for me through all this, especially like towards the end when I really made a life change, was that I could never accept myself. I never could. Us complex trauma people, us childhood trauma survivors, we have a hard time accepting ourselves because we've never really found an identity that could be accepted. Everything in our life was made up of trying to be better, trying to be good enough, trying to be someone who is perfect even, that we could never accept ourselves, and the people around us, whether they tried to or not, we couldn't be accepted by them. We didn't let it happen for whatever reason. It didn't feel comfortable, and naturally so. Those feelings are valid for whatever reason came up. But I think in my life, no matter how much awareness I gained of my issues, no matter how many times I tried to work through my trauma, I found an unhealthy way to use it. Whether I projected it through hatred, whether I abused myself, whether I couldn't cope with the emotions that come up in like EMDR or any other appointment, I would like cope with drugs and alcohol or something. And eventually, no matter how much therapy I did, before I got into my intensive program that I was talking about, before that, I just felt like I was constantly just learning without application. And eventually I found a new group of friends that I tried to like almost test this stuff out on. It was a gross thing, but I also wasn't able to keep drinking and keep, basically partying and stuff. And people, they boosted my ego and I really got intoxicated by that. And all that stuff just built up more and more. And I became a twisted version of myself with this false confidence that was rooted in this sort of fake idea that I've accepted myself for who I am. All while I'm still binge drinking, binge eating, gaining weight still. All while I'm just in this state where everything hurts and I don't want to live anymore. When I'm thinking terribly about other people, when I hate the people who are supposed to be my friends, when I hate the people who are supposed to be my family. And I have valid feelings all of this. I don't shame myself anymore for that. I don't see myself as a bad person. But at the time, I could not do that. And so it would just start a cycle of constant self-abuse, a lack of self-acceptance, until, unfortunately, it built up with those same friends. And from my alcoholism, from the fallout of that July 31st day, I got in a fight with family and friends, with people who I'd never want to hurt ever. And it was more of a rampage than anything, reminiscent of my old anger I used to have as a kid. And luckily they're okay, but like I saw my friends, and I had already been arrested 3 times before this, by the way, from the violence of my past. But I saw my friends as something that were not friends to me anymore. I truly felt like I hated them for what I thought they did to me. And of course there was enabling there, but I also enabled them to enable me. And I hurt myself more and more and more. And the fight, it was a wake-up call because I got arrested again for the 4th time. And I knew that I couldn't live like that anymore. And while that sounds like a positive thing, when I said it to myself, it wasn't. I meant it when I said I wouldn't live like that anymore. And if it didn't mean something positive, you can infer what I mean by that. I thought I was going to prison. I thought it was over. I thought my life was over. I thought I became the monster that I was destined to be. I truly did. But from then, I also found a spark. I found a true spark, a real calling. Because I went into that DBT, it's a dialectal behavioral therapy program, a 3-month intensive program. And through that, I found my calling. Something I was truly good at. Something that showed me I was not only a good person, but something that showed me I was good at things. Because at that time, I didn't think I was good at anything, And from there, I gained skills, wisdom, insight, confidence. And all of a sudden, God's plan was working through me again. I could feel it, even though I wasn't... By the way, I was raised and baptized, or I was born and baptized Protestant. I gave up on the faith a while ago as a kid. But then I came back recently, in like the past 4 weeks. But before then, in 2023, which is when all this good stuff happened, I could feel a fire that was very much spiritual. I could tell now, in hindsight, that God's plan was working through me once again. It was that same hunger and desire that I had when given that proposition to give the bone marrow transplant. It was a calling. And so I lost, eventually, 100 pounds in 6 months through sheer determination and exercise and diet. And then I've lost since 20 more pounds over the past 4 months, and I'm still going, almost done. I got sober from the day that I got arrested. I also quit nicotine like 2 months later. I became a man that I could be proud of. A wise man who has something to offer. And then I started this podcast, I started doing stuff with myself that was good, real good stuff. And then all of a sudden, things made sense. And I finished that program feeling like I had a path, a future. I did so much of my life, from that kid who was so lost to, in less than a year, a kid who had direction and aim. And then eventually I realized, all this is great. It's wonderful. I finally feel a little bit more secure, but I'm still not fully accepting myself for who I am. And so eventually I got introduced to a Bible study class by my friend. I had already entertained the idea of higher power and stuff, and I was just talking to him about it, and he introduced the Bible study class. And from then, I saw something really cool. I saw people all working together for a common cause. People my age who are really cool people. There's none of the stigma that you might think about them. They truly are good, cool people, and most are, I've found. you know. And through it, I saw that they're accepting as well. And it was still, of course, not the acceptance I was fully looking for in the grand sense. That was yet to come. But after like 4 weeks or something, I realized that I needed something more. Acceptance of who I was, acceptance of that inner child. I could only take him so far. I can only take myself so far through my wisdom and coping mechanisms and all that stuff, therapy and stuff. I have to take that with me. But once I come to the door that has a lock on it, after opening up so many doors, I need to get that key. But I get that key not from myself, but from Christ. Really. There was like a blockade. I couldn't get by it, you know? But once I talked to my friend and eventually it resonated. I'll tell the story, I guess. It's not that big of a story, but it's like, it's basically just, I understood that I had this sort of idea that I had to prove myself as worthy. But not only that, I had to be a man that was above everything. My life had always been that of inadequacy. I always felt inadequate. Like I said, I never felt like I was good at anything. And it got so crazy to the point where even I was thinking like, oh, I'm Jesus Christ when I was psychotic and stuff. That inadequacy complex is what fueled that. And it's what fuels perfectionism for me. It's what fuels a lack of acceptance, trying to be above the realistic standard I can set for myself. I talked to my friend about that, and after I got home from that talk, I realized there's only one man who could allow me to be okay with being below. And from that, I could form an idea to be below in other ways and be okay with it. That man was Jesus Christ. I felt truly like there was something there, you know, like it was okay to be below this man, you know? And from then, acceptance came a little easier. Because I know us complex trauma people, us childhood trauma people, we strive for such acceptance and validation and support from people around us and from ourselves. But there is a man who can give it to you. His name is Jesus Christ. He truly can. As corny as it sounds, it's true. We can push ourselves so far. We can find acceptance. But it needs to be reciprocated back from people or from something, and Christ will always give it to you. I trust that. I trust you to believe that when it comes. It's true. And this is not some kid who was turned to God through some deceptive means or through some manipulation. This was a kid who allowed himself to naturally flow to it and resonated so hard with it by the end that he had to accept it. Christianity can be something of a fellowship. It can be something of an acceptance. It could be something of a hobby, a career even. It could be so many different things. But it's all things you could ever want from something because it's encompassing of who you are. Us as childhood trauma survivors, a lot of times look for an identity and for a purpose as well. And we can't find it because no one is worthy enough to give it to us, including ourselves. But through Christianity, we find a purpose. There's something there. There's something that's like actually worth pursuing. And it's guided through a path of faith and hope. Like I said, hope got me to this point, and now that's turned into faith. And faith all of a sudden becomes something that is so much more than just a belief. It's a path. It's aim. It's purpose. And through that purpose, you'll find acceptance. Acceptance for that inner child, that young kid who's always wanted to just feel like he was worth something. It's powerful. It really is. And I just recently did this, so this podcast is going to mainly be a mental health. It's always going to be a mental health podcast, but it's mainly that right now, and it'll stay that way. But eventually, as I learn over long term, I want to apply more and more Christian stuff to this. I want this to be like a Christian mental health podcast because I think it's a cool idea, if I can put it in the way that suits my personality. And I think if you guys want to hop on board with me, there's a lot to be learned for both of us. I'm going to learn the gospel. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to do all that stuff, all that cool stuff that, everyone else does. But I'm also going to come back here and talk about mental health. It's always going to have that. And it'll always be for you guys, for you guys who, whether believers or not, want to hear about this stuff. And I'm always going to have my Christian view, but I'll always be here for anyone who wants to hear it because I believe everyone can resonate with this. Whether or not you want to is fine. But everyone, no matter who you are, can be accepted into this. So I'm excited to do it. I'm excited. And thank you for watching this first video thing that I've done. I hope it was worth the time. That's all for today. See ya!